Welcome to Force Perspective. I have been kidnapped by pirates. And I have to admit, I'm a little confused as to why. I mean, far be it for me to criticize some no-name pirate's master plan, but there are certain issues that can't really be ignored. Like, well, it's easier for me just to demonstrate. You see the problem. Today we'll be taking a look at Overfall, a game full of all the classic fantasy races, including my personal favorite, the always lovable dwarves, with their magnificent beards and height. It's not really a factor in this, everyone's basically the same size, but still, there's something charming about a proud people carving a living out underground through nothing but the strength of their slaves. They're drug-dependent slaves. There's just something about that. After the immortal Everking united the humans against the orcs, ceasing their terrible rule upon the land, he deems it necessary in his infinite wisdom to send two mighty heroes into the strange portal that has suddenly materialized. This transports them into another world inhabited by a violent and mysterious people known as the Vorn. In this inhospitable land, the heroes are to recover the powerful Disc of Ages and return in order to save the world. And after they do all that, you take control and have to deal with the fact that everybody hates everybody else. Also, the Vorn are just Vikings. There you go. Overfall is a strategy RPG with roguelite elements, and also a bunch of other similar nonsense that doesn't tell you anything specific. So, instead of caring about any of that, I'm just gonna go through the main parts of the game, the overworld, encounters, and combat, in the order that you would first experience them, and we'll just forget this ever happened. Alright, good. So first things first, the overworld is not all that exciting to look at. It's kind of just a boat. For the most part, it's just a means for you to move from encounter to encounter. But, oh, no, we can't move on yet. It's not that simple. It may not be exciting, but it's still a major part of the game. There's still stuff to talk about. I mean, the islands are just encounter triggers, sure, but they're not all the same. There are different island types for each race. And that's not just a cosmetic thing, it changes the encounters you can get. This is an important distinction to make because, well, encounters comprise 1/3 of the game, but also, in relation to the overworld, it's significant because you can only come across members of a race on their respective islands. Now, that may not seem that important, but it is. It's actually the most important thing. And I know this may sting a little, but look pretty foolish right now. You see, there are 6 different races: dwarves, elves, orcs, goblins, hollows, and forsaken. And each of them has a mutual hatred for one of the others. Okay, that doesn't seem that important, but that's just because it's not, alright? It's just something that need to be said before the actual important thing, where nothing has changed. You still look stupid. Alright, so the actual, quote, most important thing is not the races themselves, but rather your reputation with them. And reputation is important for 2 reasons. The first one being, you need it to complete the game. You see, for every positive interaction you have with a race, you are rewarded with some reputation with them. And once you have a high enough reputation with any one of the races, you are given a quest that leads you straight to the end of the game. Now, I think it's fair to say that the primary completion requirement is substantial enough to be called important, but that's not even the end of it, because it also can give you someone to help fend off that crippling loneliness. I kid, mostly. But back to the game. Yeah, reputation isn't just a completion requirement. Gaining enough overall reputation also unlocks companion slots, with a max of 2. And companions technically cost a rune, so I guess we're done with reputation at this point. But regardless, companions are amazing. They're useful in every part of the game, except for the one we're currently on, which is not ideal. To put it simply, in the encounters, you're given different responses, which is a thing no other upgrade gives you, and for the combat, it gives you another person. You have access to another turn, more abilities. It's a large power jump. A power jump that's way better than any of the other upgrades, of which there are a few. Couple. There's 2. You have the bizarre weapon upgrades and the class-specific ability improvements, both of which are a little lackluster. None of these persist, by the way. Permadeath and all that. Anyways, the weapon upgrades, which are put into categories of head, an added effect to your attacks, hilt, a passive improvement to your character in combat, like higher accuracy or extra range, and enchantment, a randomly generated mix of both. Potentially. I'm not 100% sure what it can and cannot be, but either way, all of these upgrades are alright. The only problem is, whenever I had the funds to spare on them, it was pretty late in the game, and I wasn't exactly willing to brave Viking-infested waters just to find a bazaar. The Vorn are everywhere later in the game. They sort of serve as a threat timer. And chalk up another one for companions on this one, because their adventure ships basically give you seaside service wherever you are whenever a companion slot becomes available, not like those lazy guild ships with their class improvements and, well, that's about it, but that's what I was trying to get at, so it's good enough. Yeah, so the class improvements improve each of the respective classes' utility skills. We'll get to them eventually, just go with it. And what it normally adds is a small chance of an extra effect. Now, I don't know how that sounds to you, but I can tell you it doesn't feel great. None of them are that interesting, nor are they powerful. They're just these little additions that may trigger if you're lucky, and combine that with the fact that you have to somehow find this single traveling ship for the class you want to upgrade, and it's just not an enjoyable experience. Plus, they cost quite a bit of dust, which could be traded for a lot of frags, and I haven't talked about the resources. None of this makes sense yet. Now, right, the resources are there. You got frags, the main currency. Not entirely sure why it's not just called gold, but it's not. Then you've got food, which does exactly what you think it does. And finally, well, technically there's still runes, but we already talked about how they're used for companions, and their only other use is if you die. And this is the fine gentleman who brings you back. So it may be better just to stay dead. But getting back to what I was saying before, the last resource is dust, a magical drug that can be used to give your boat a short speed boost, or give it to class trainers as mentioned before. However, if you want my input, get rid of it. Winners don't do drugs. They sell them. Alright, on that note, let's move on to the next section of the game. The encounters, which, if the overworld is just a means to get to encounters, then I guess encounters are just a way to get into combat, but let's not go down that road. It leads to a lot of metaphysical discussion about the real purpose of a game, or perhaps, more importantly, if there's any purpose to be found in anything that we'll ever come across during our miserable short existence on an unimportant rock, spinning around an equally inconsequential star in a galaxy that makes up less than a fraction of a percent of a universe that may very well also not hold any meaning or purpose. So I'm just going to tell you how the game's encounters work. Breaking it down for the sake of simplicity, encounters are, well, encounters with something, generally a person. And then you have to deal with that, whatever it is, using the choices given to you. And while I still say that's an oversimplification of things, when it comes to your interaction with the encounters, yeah, no, that's pretty much it. With the exception of class traits, which are conveniently written into your character's bio and give you additional actions to choose from. Also, your companions have traits, because companions are people too. Less important people, but, you know. Past that, though, the only other thing that affects how an encounter is going to go is purely random. Maybe during one run, you choose to help, and everything goes as expected, and then the next time you do the exact same thing, then all of a sudden, this guy, just this guy, traitor. Anyways, the point is that there's more variety here than it first may seem. You just don't have any control over it. Which can be annoying if you're unlucky like me and keep getting the same results over and over and over again. Something made even more annoying by the fact that I'm pretty sure that the main purpose of the randomized results was to minimize any sort of monotony. It was supposed to keep the player from getting bored, but it didn't really do that. Now, I have played quite a bit of this game, trying to figure everything out, like what triggers what, is there something huge I'm missing, what purpose do the pirates serve? I never figured out that last one, but my playtime was not unreasonable, especially when I can't really see much value to this game if it can't be played, not necessarily for that long, but in that way. It needs to be played as, for lack of a better word, pseudo-roguelike. It just doesn't have a strong enough narrative or enough depth to be a one-and-done kind of game. It needs that constant replayability. But because a hefty portion of the game, the Overworld, as I believe I called it, and the encounters become a chore after a while, it falls a little flat in that regard. Fortunately, however, there is something else in this game that can potentially help with the stagnation problem. They have a story builder. I really don't like the name, but it's accurate, I guess. It's a way that anyone can make encounters, and it's pretty well put together. The interface isn't bad, it's simple enough that it's more a case of writing a story than anything else, so combined with the Steam Workshop, you can add more encounters and help spice things up a bit. But there's not a large enough player base to support it, which isn't the game's fault, but it is the game's fault that it's needed as badly as it is, so bad game. No. That was weird. That was a weird thing I did. Moving on, actually, the story thing would help with this, come to think of it, and it's technically not a problem. It's the writing. I don't have a problem with it, personally. I don't think it's amazing, but I don't dislike it either. But I could see how it may be polarizing. It's a little too referential for its own good. Sometimes I think it may be the only material that it has, but when it's finally not referencing something, it seems more like it's trying to be smarter than it actually is. And if I'm gonna be entirely honest, this is starting to hit too close to home. I'm gonna stop. But long story short, you may not like the writing. And that brings us to something that's pretty difficult to place, in all honesty. It technically happens during encounters. That's not up for debate. You can just look at it. It's right there. But in practice, it has more to do with combat, really. So I'm just gonna put it here, and is it the end of one or the beginning of the other? Oh god, it's happening again. No, I'm talking about the unlocks. I say unlocks, but I'm also including passive abilities. Or as this game calls them, personas. Also, I'm suddenly better, so that's good. Basically, personas are given to you once you do something a certain number of times, like visiting a volcanic island, or getting stabbed. And once you do that, you can either get a positive or negative persona, seemingly chosen at random. An example of this, for the volcanic one mentioned before, either you get increased or decreased damage when fighting on one of those islands. Also, it may make you spontaneously burst into flames. That is another option. But there's a lot of them, so I'm not going to go into much more detail other than telling you they don't persist between playthroughs. Or runs? I should really be better at this by now. Either way, win or lose, it ain't coming with you. That's all the more I'll say. Really, the main reason I'm mentioning them at all is because normally a certain persona is required to unlock the primary thing that I do want to talk about, permanent unlocks, like weapons, or actually, I should really start with the classes, since, you know, they're the ones that get the weapons. That works a lot better. But they're the ones that don't need personas, and that really ruins everything. It was going so well. Shame. Anyways, the classes, which are not actually classes, that entails some level of character customization, of which there isn't any. Also, they have backstories. They're characters, alright? Characters! Learn English, you stupid Turkish developers! So getting back to the classes, you have the fighter and cleric, the default ones that are unlocked from the start, and then you have the monk, the guardian, the druid, rogue, warlord, wizard, and ranger. Each need to be unlocked by doing a thing. A secret thing! All you're given is a hint for each one, not that you really need them. I didn't even look at them, if I'm entirely honest. I just sort of pulled a Mr. Magoo, blindly stumbling around, and found them on accident. But, well, there was one exception, the druid. Stupid magic hippies. But regardless, I got them all, eventually. And now I can go out of the weapons, and trinkets, and utility spells. All the class unlocks. Really caught up on those weapons for some reason. Anyways, the way characters work in this, combat-wise anyways, which is hex... Yeah, there's a bunch of hexagons. I'm gonna try not to insult you. But on your character's turn, you have 3 phases to play with. You have the movement phase, utility phase, and attack phase. The only thing interesting about the movement phase is each class has 1 movement skill that they can use instead of taking the normal movement. Some of them are just move and also deal damage, but others are more versatile, like the cleric can pull an ally while healing them, and these skills never change. which is weird because you can change everything else, but you know what? Who cares? Whatever. The other phases are where the weapons and stuff come into play. Speaking of which, the class-specific weapons, which is all of them, probably should mention that before, but there you go. Well, anyways, they each give you a different set of 3 attack skills. Attack skills that come during the attack phase, which happens after the utility phase, but the weapons are above the utility. Excuse me for a moment. Oh, wait. Job done! Yay, I did it. Now, as for the utility skills, well, they don't work the same way as attack skills, at least not in the sense that attack skills are attached to a weapon and then you get a set. Utility skills, you can just choose any 3 of them. Any of the 3 that you have, just choose them. You're good. And, well, they're by and large buffs or debuffs. Or purges for buffs or debuffs that have already been used. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of status effects. Like, a lot of them. It's very rare if there's not something over someone's head. It gets a little ridiculous. And it's not just a utility thing either. Most of the attacks inflict status effects, and the ones that don't combo with a specific one or react in some way to them. Also, they deal damage. They do still do that. Alright, well, that makes it sound like that's all there is to the attack skills, which isn't true. They have different ranges, attack areas, positioning effects like knockback, pretty much everything you'd expect from a hex-based combat system. It's just that the combat overall, which is apparently what we're talking about now, even though I never got to the trinkets, they give you passives. Okay, now with that out of the way, the combat as a whole feels very status effect focused because comboing things together is pretty powerful. For example, the monk can inflict the tormented effect on people, making it so they take damage for every hex they move, and his default attack set has a push skill. That's a combo that does a lot of damage as well as controlling your enemy's position, and it's really simple. So once you see that obvious combo and try delving into more complicated ones, it starts feeling like all you're doing is applying and removing status effects, even if that's not actually the case. Now, if you like experimenting with that kind of thing, then I'm sure there's plenty of potential. Seeing as how you have 9 classes, each with 5 weapons that give you 3 attack skills. Then you have 8 utility skills, and you get to choose 2 of these characters. Plus, you could eventually choose 2 of the 32 companions, each that have combat skills of their own. So, if that's your thing, go nuts! And I think that's all the major pieces. So, take all that, add these things. Imagine separate storylines involving each of those races I mentioned before, or at least I hope I mentioned them. It's been a long day. But do all that, fast forward to the end of one of those races' storylines, pop this guy in there, and that's pretty much the game. Now, how do I feel about all that? I genuinely enjoyed myself for the first 10 hours or so, but after that, it did become a bit of a chore. So, if you think that sounds perfectly fine, or if you really like messing around with different combinations of things and playing that way, then hopefully that mental collage I had you build demonstrated Overfall's worth to you. If not, well, I mean, at least it demonstrated something's worth. Mine! Yay! Okay, thanks for watching. Click over here to watch my last video, and, not sure if you've noticed yet, but finally made captain. I have no idea how to sail this thing. That's what they were for.